Winter doesn't mean failure for your plants. It means you need to adapt. Join me in this video where I will guide you through what is normal and expected during this month and what maybe isn't. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So yes, as I kind of just mentioned, during this video I want to guide you through what is kind of normal at this time of the year. It's obviously winter, it's colder, it's darker, it's all of these things, and a lot of people, this is the point of the year where they really start stressing out about their plants. You're obviously not going to be stressing out that much about your plants when it's spring and summer, and you know what? Everything is going well, all of my plants are in active growth, everything seems to be super happy. That's not always the case in winter. In winter, this is a time when you're going to see a whole bunch of brown crispiness on the leaves. You might see some yellowing on the leaves. You might see some marks on the leaves that you're not used to seeing. You might see leaf drop happening a lot more. Some of these things are normal, and some of these things might be kind of hinting towards something that you might need to look at addressing. This is what this video is going to be kind of touching on. Let's first talk about what is normal in the winter months, what you are going to be experiencing regardless of anything else you could be doing. So the first big thing is either slow or no growth. This is completely normal. This is a time of the year where things are not going to be at the happiest. A lot of the plants might be going fully dormant. I am looking at you, Alocasias, Calatheas, Caladiums, and a whole host of other plants that basically just don't do very much during the winter months, and that is normal. Start reframing how you look at some of these things and just assume that, you know what, this is like what animals will do that might be hibernating. These plants need these periods of rest in order to come back stronger during the spring and summer, and it is kind of at least partially normal for a lot of them to do this. Same thing goes for your plants that might get slower growth happening to them. Again, fully normal. Think about where these plants are coming from originally. A lot of these plants are tropical house plants. They're coming in from rainforest kind of environments around the globe. They're not used to having this much of a change in terms of seasonality. So the fact that they just take a pause and just go, you know what, this is less than ideal situations. I'm still going to try growing, but maybe not as much as I would do if everything was as perfect as it could be. Because again, something that people forget, something that you might want to have a look at online, have a look at average light and temperature in some of those locations that these plants are coming from. Ecuador, Costa Rica, some of the Far East as well. Have a look at where your plants are coming from and have a look and see what that temperature fluctuation is throughout the year, and also the daylight hour as well. And what you probably will see is that it doesn't change too much. Funny little side story here. I had a friend of mine, I think she was from Jamaica if I'm not mistaken, and I was just like, oh, so what's the temperature? I've never been to Jamaica. What's the temperature like in the winter months? And she was just like, oh, it's like, and I might be getting the numbers a bit wrong here. I'll see if I'll correct myself on the video, but she was just like, oh, 30 degrees Celsius. I'm just like, oh, okay, so that's the winter. What's the summer? She's just like 32 or 33. And I'm just like, oh, wow, there's like very little change in temperature throughout the seasons. So some of your plants might be experiencing something similar in their natural habitat, which means that if they're experiencing bigger changes than that, likely would be why they are either stopping entirely or at least pausing. The other big one that usually stresses people out, and I'll show you a couple of examples. I've got them here, and they kind of match my top today as well. Yellowing older leaves. These are some of the oldest leaves that I had, and you can see how long they are. Some of the oldest leaves that I had on my Anthurium vitarifolium. These leaves are probably about 6 years old now, 5 or 6 years old, so they have served their purpose, but they are the oldest leaves and they yellow off and die off at this time of the year. fully normal. These will be the lowest leaves. If you've got a growing stem that goes upwards, these will be the lowest leaves on your plant. And that is because the plant is basically going, you know what, I need that energy, whatever energy I can get during this time of the year, to be redirected to my newest growth, which is usually going to be at the top. In this situation, it would be the growing tip at the very end. So that is going to be something that you're going to see more and more at. If you start seeing yellowing leaves much higher up on the plant and everything else is green further down below, that's a different story altogether. The next big thing that you're probably going to notice is, I'm trying to get dust-offs in this as well. So on things like some of your Calatheas, but not just exclusive to Calatheas, some of the Dracaenas might be the same. You might be getting crispy leaf tips, and that is normal. This is the time of the year where the humidity levels are going to drop because you've possibly got your central heating on, and also the tip of most of the leaves, especially on something like Calatheas where the leaves are very thin. Any plant that has got very thin leaves, the tip of the leaf is the thinnest layer of cells possible. So they are going to be the most sensitive things to drying up and crisping up, and that's why you would get that a lot more. Obviously there's other things that could be happening. It could be salt deposits, it could be the water that you're giving it. That's an entirely different story. But by and large, if you're seeing that happen more in the winter months, it is because the humidity level is lower, or there might be some struggles with water. This is normal. The other thing that is quite normal for this time of the year is drooping leaves, especially if you are getting times of the year where you're getting, this is most of the winter in the UK, when you're getting really grey or overcast days, and especially if you're relying on something like natural light, the leaves might droop a bit more because they're not getting the kind of light level that they're expecting. And especially if you start seeing those leaves perk up again during the sunnier days, that is completely normal. That is something that is to be expected during this time of the year where it's colder and darker. You might get some more specific type of leaf drop as well. So I kind of mentioned the Alocasia where they might lose all of their leaves, or potentially something like certain Ficuses, they might lose some of this kind of, think of it a bit like partial deciduousness. Even though it really isn't true deciduous plants, it's kind of in a similar vein that you would expect some leaf drop because of that kind of change in season. But let's talk about things that are not normal, things that you need to be paying attention to if you are noticing them. First thing is going to be mushy stems or roots, possibly suggesting that there might be some rot that's happening on there, which again, this is rot. Root rot, or generally rot in plants, can happen at any time of the year. It is exponentially more likely that it's going to happen in the winter, more so than it's going to happen in the spring and summer, because pots stay wetter for longer. They don't use up moisture as quickly as possible. It might be because it's cold, it might be because the light levels aren't there. It means that there is more of a chance that it's staying wetter for longer and there's less air being able to go into those root systems, and the root systems will then start getting rot. So that's something you really need to be paying attention to and addressing. I've done an entire video on root rot, and I'll link it somewhere at the top of this video if you want to go and see that in more details in terms of what you could do to rectify things. Another thing that you might be noticing on your plants is black spots, maybe on the leaves, some of the stems. That might be due to some bacterial issues as well, depending on the environment that you have. If it's too humid and it's too cold and there's not enough air circulation. I have spoken about air circulation in depth. I've even done a full video. Again, I will link it at the top of this video if you want to go and have a look at that in more detail. That is going to be something that you are going to be more at risk at this time of the year because the conditions are all just there. That is going to be something that you need to be paying attention to, because you need to start addressing that before it becomes a bigger issue, especially for other plants around the plant that is exhibiting the issue. So that could spread. So that is something that you really do need to be addressing, and it's definitely not something that is normal for this time of the year. The other big one is going to be rapid leaf loss. So we talked about leaf loss before, which is normal. So 1 or 2 leaves every so often, usually the oldest leaves, because the plant is redirecting the energy to its growing stem. But if, for instance, you've got a plant that has 15 leaves and within a week and a half you've lost 10, that's an issue. That isn't normal. That is something that is showing that the plant is fully stressed. Again, the first thing that I would say at this point is check for root rot, because it might be that the plant is really just not got any more roots. And this is the thing as well that people always forget with root rot. The canopy or the leaves of the plant match, in a healthy plant, match the roots. So if you've got 100% leaves at the top and 100% roots at the bottom, everything is happy. If all of a sudden your roots reduce by 50% and you've still got 100% of the leaves, guess what the plant is going to try and do at that point? Take the leaves down to 50% of what they used to be to match the roots, because otherwise that root mass, which is 50% smaller now, isn't going to be able to handle maintaining all of that 100% of the leaf structure at the top. So definitely check your roots at that point. The other thing that is going to be something that you're really going to need to address quite quickly is going to be persistent wilting of your leaves even after you've watered. So you might be getting some wilting that's happening on the leaves and you're just assuming, you're just like, oh, you know what? It is because I've not watered this plant or it's been dry for too long. But if it continues to wilt even after you've watered it, again, that is not normal behavior. Check the roots of your plant, check for pests, check for any kind of like black spots, anything at that point that you could think of that could be causing that, check, 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 because that is not normal behavior at this time of the year. And the thing that most people tend to forget, especially in the winter months, because we're so used to talking about it in the summer as being a bit of an issue in the summer, is pests. You might be getting an abundance of spider mites, for example, or even fungus gnats. That is something that isn't fully normal at this time of the year. It's more risky at this time of the year because when things start getting a bit less humid and a bit drier is generally when we'll see more of the spider mites come out. We're looking at all of the Alocasias and the Calatheas, which are both types of plants that tend to be a bit more stressed during the colder months of the year, the colder and darker months of the year. And on top of that, you also have to deal with pests that are just like, this is a perfect time for us to make that plant even more stressed than it already is because of the season. So keep an eye on it and start addressing it sooner rather than later. And the same thing goes with fungus gnats. Fungus gnats tend to get a bit more prolific in the winter versus the summer. And again, some of this might seem counterintuitive, but in the summer, what generally happens is things dry out faster, which is less than ideal conditions in the soil level for those fungus gnats. Guess what takes longer to happen in the winter? Yes, your soil takes longer to dry, which means that it's much more ideal conditions for fungus gnats to survive. So these are things that you need to be checking out because they are not fully normal for this time of the year. Now let's talk about troubleshooting a bit more and what to do and when. So the first thing that you need to kind of be looking at if something is going wrong or something that you're not expecting and isn't normal for this time of the year is repotting or not repotting. So few things that you need to remember when it comes to repotting, especially during this time of the year. It's not, even though a lot of us do a lot of repotting because the reality is we're all a bit bored in the winter. There's not enough going on with our plants, so we want to keep ourselves busy. This is not the best time of the year to be repotting because it's not the best time of the year for a plant. Regardless of what you're doing, when you're repotting a plant, you are introducing some level of stress into it. So there is something to be said about not making a bad situation worse. So if your plant is stressed and it's not due to root issues, repotting it whilst it's already stressed is going to make things worse. So be 100% sure. I would almost go full kind of like black or white here. So unless your plant has got a lot of root rot, and I say a lot of root rot because sometimes you get the tiniest bit of root rot and you can sometimes avoid having to repot and stress a plant, especially if it's a sensitive plant. by just kind of letting it fully dry out as much as possible in the winter. And then when the spring and summer comes around, then you can look at doing a heavier repot and removing some of those roots. That is still risky though. So I would say if you're not sure about what you are doing yet, if there is any root rot, that would be the right time to repot. And I would almost say at this point, take a step back. And what do I mean by that is don't repot into a bigger pot, don't change the soil and remove the root rot and put it into a bigger pot, or even the same pot, even if you haven't lost a lot of the roots, put it into a pot size smaller. Because if you're going to make that move anyway, I know it sounds like a backwards move and it is to a certain extent, however, it's slightly less risky because you're putting it into a smaller pot. It will dry out a bit faster and hopefully you'll avoid the same issue happening altogether. Obviously, if it's a plant and it's rust and it's lost 80% of its roots due to root rot, the pot is going to be considerably smaller than just one size down from where you were before. The pot size needs to match the root mass, not the leaf mass, which can mean sometimes, and I've had this happen to me and a lot of other people have done this as well, where you somehow manage to keep most of the leaves of the plant and it's fine, but you lose a lot of the roots. It can happen. And all of a sudden you end up with a massive plant in the tedious little pot. That is better, and it's going to be tricky because how is it going to balance? You're going to need to get ingenious with a bit of engineering on how you're going to manage to balance things out so it doesn't drop off all the time. But that will be healthier for the plant, at least in the short term. And if it starts bouncing back relatively quickly, you can start up potting soon after that, basically. But be very careful when to repot and when not to repot. And now let's talk about pruning. So pruning might be leaf removal. And I'm thinking here, the obvious example is if you've got a leaf or a plant that's heavily infested with something like spider mites. That's the easiest example I can give you, because a lot of times people are just like, I'm just going to cut the leaf off. And instead of like still treat the rest of the plant, but if there's one part of it that's heavily infested, I'll take that and remove it. Yes. That is probably the wise thing to do there, but you also need to remember the balance of everything else. So say you've got, I'm going to give you a very extreme example. Say you've got a Calathea, yeah? Say Calathea orbifolia, which has got those big round leaves, but it's only got 2 leaves, yeah? 2 leaves. One that has a tiny bit of spider mite damage, one that is heavily infected basically. And you want to remove that badly infested leaf and keep the other one. There is a slight risk there, and this is something that you're going to need to adjust, is you have just, and I know some of that leaf wasn't functioning as well as it could be, so say the 2 leaves were 100% of all of its foliage, and you remove 1 leaf, you'd be sitting there going, okay, I've left with 50%. Yes, but before it wasn't at 100% anyway, because this leaf was 50%. This wasn't really 50% of the foliage. This was actually probably closer to 30 because there was damage from the pest. So removing that 1 leaf is still going to have less foliage mass. What does this mean and what do we need to adjust? The watering. So you're going to need to slightly pull back because there's going to be more roots than there is leaves at that point. So just make sure that you're giving it enough time to photosynthesize, or maybe not reducing the water, maybe bump it up and give it a touch more light, because that 1 leaf then, that 50% that's left, is going to need to do the work of 30% more. Does that make sense? I'm giving you a lot of numbers in this one, but hopefully that makes sense, because that's going to need to carry a lot more than it was carrying before. So that is something that you're going to need to be smart on how you do things. And let's talk, seeing as we're talking about pests, let's talk about isolation, especially when it comes to quarantine, essentially, for plants when you're talking about pests or even kind of bacterial issues. So if it's a bacterial issue, I would say try, and you can, and you've got the luxury, I don't have the luxury because I don't have any space left anymore to kind of quarantine things, quarantine that plant. If you've got pests, especially pests that don't need leaf-to-leaf touching, so spider mites, they cannot fly. So they need to find another leaf that's touching 1 leaf that they're on in order for them to move across it. So it's like the pest superhighway. Those types of plants, if you can't isolate it, at least try to remove anything else from around it and you should be fine. Another little thing that most people do not talk about, if you cannot quarantine your plant And at least you can kind of put it in a location where nothing else is touching it and there's no risk of those pests moving onto anything else. The extra little mile that I would suggest that you do at that point is, if you're watering everything else from the same watering can, do that. That one plant, water it from a different watering can, or water it with one set of water, and then whatever water comes out of that drainage holes at the bottom of that pot, throw it entirely away and rinse out your watering can or anything else like that, because sometimes there's going to be some pests that are floating within that water. You might not be able to see it, and if you then reuse that same water that was from the pest-riddled plant to water other plants, guess what you've just done? You've just taken those pests on a great journey onto a new plant, yes? So try doing that if you can, and just kind of keeping it separate. But if you can quarantine, move things to a quarantine location, there is going to be then the balance of what's the conditions going to be like in your quarantine location. Because a lot of people are just like, yes, just quarantine your plant, which is great when it's all pretty much equal and fair in the spring and summer, where everything, even your quarantine location, is going to be ideal. But you need to then start considering in the winter months where it's cooler, darker, all of these things, is your quarantine position or location good? Does it have lower humidity than anywhere else in your house? Does it have lower light levels than anywhere else in your house? All of these things are going to play a factor, because if your plant's already stressed, it's a tricky time of the year anyway from them, and you put them in an even worse condition whilst trying to rehab them, you might be doing more harm than is good. So there is that to be meant, but it's going to be a balancing act between trying to not infect the rest of your plants with either bacterial issues or the pest issues. Also, by the way, bacterial issues, when I was talking about before, same thing goes for the watering can. Try to keep things separate as much as possible than the rest of your kind of collection, because that's a way that it can spread quite easily. And ultimately, there are going to be certain things that you're going to be looking at and just going, is it okay if I just leave it alone and let it go until spring? So if you don't have an awful lot of root rot and you don't want to risk unrooting things, that could be, you're going to still need to make some adjustments. Same thing goes for pests, same thing goes for everything else. But that is a risk that you're going to be needing to willingly take, and you might still need to make some adjustments in order to make sure that nothing else gets worse around it if you're going to leave things until spring. But there are going to be certain plants, I'm sorry to bust the bubble for you in this one, that if you do all of these things, it might stress it out enough that it might die off. Or you could let it go on for a bit longer and go until the spring, and it might look really busted by then, but the spring and summer alone might be enough to solve the issue without having to do all those other extra steps, which might still end up killing the plant. Does that make sense? So you're gonna need to use some judgment, and this is where all of us plant parents learn from mistakes or successes as to what works and what doesn't work. But that part of the journey I can't go on for you. We all need to experience that in our own way, because all of us are different in our care, in our conditions, in what we're providing to the plants. So that learning experience that you're going to have with either doing something or not and waiting is going to be truly unique to you and your situation. So you need to go on that path, at least on your own for some of it, so you can learn that lesson. And coming into some of my final thoughts, some final top tips that I would have, I'd encourage you to maybe do a bit of journaling, or at least take some notes when some of these things are happening, especially not only if you're just starting off. Actually, I think there's value to this throughout however long you've been dealing with plants, of noting and kind of saying, okay, this happened because of this, and this happened because of this, and I did this because of this, and this is what occurred. Because depending on how much you've got going on in your life, depending on how big your collection is or how small your collection is, you might still not remember some of these things in the next year. And I am going to put my hand up and say my memory is shocking. So I have made the same mistakes over and over and over again because I just didn't jot things down. I've got a lot better now. I've got my plant care app, and I put notes on that, and at least I can remember what's happening. It also gives you an understanding as well. If you've taken a note somewhere and just gone, okay, I've repotted this plant because I lost 50% of its roots, and you've got a date next to it, when you come to like spring and summer and just go, my God, this plant is doing amazingly. I remember something was wrong with it. What was wrong with it? And you check and you can just go, wow, it was only 3 months ago where it lost all of its roots. It could be quite good. Both goods and bads as well. You can kind of think it's just like, actually, this didn't really improve since then. So do I need to be adjusting anything? And because you've put dates on something like this, you can also see when was the last time you stressed out the plant, because ultimately as days and weeks go by, you might be like, oh, I did that repot because the root rot such a long time ago. I should probably do it again. It's not getting any better. And you look at your notes and you just go, actually, it was a week and a half ago. It wasn't that long ago. So maybe I just need to wait for a bit longer. It will help. And ultimately, what I would say is at this time of the year where things can be a bit doom and gloomy and you've got things that might be expected but less than ideal, or less than expected and really less than ideal, celebrate the successes. Celebrate when things go wrong, or celebrate times when you can fix things. That is highly important to keep you happy, keep you motivated, and keep you kind of looking forward to the spring and summer. And I promise it's happening. It's happening. We're past the winter solstice. The days are gonna start getting longer. Granted, it's still early enough that it doesn't feel like it, but I promise it's happening. So always try to do that. But I encourage you, what have you experienced that is normal, not normal? Do you disagree or agree with me on some of these things? Please do let me know down below. Let's have that conversation. This can be a bit of a stressful time of the year for a lot of people. So any kind of conversation that we can all see that is happening down below, to see that we're not experiencing this on our own, is a great thing. But yes, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.